Good evening, all. We will wait for 2 more minutes and then we can start. We will wait for 2 more minutes so that people can join. And we will start exactly at 7.
Okay, sir.
Now you can turn on your camera. Then we'll be ready. Okay. So good evening, all, and we are all happy to welcome you from the MCC Research Colloquium team. Today we have a special series exclusively for MCC community that is on digital humanities. And let us start this particular series with a word of prayer. I would like to request Dr. S. Kalyani, Associate Dean, R&D, to lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come before you with grateful hearts as we gather to inaugurate this research colloquium on digital humanities. We thank you for the opportunity to come together for learning, sharing, and collaboration. We seek your blessings upon this event, guide the speakers as they present their insights, and let their talk inspire every participant who is listening to engage themselves with curiosity and to learn from each and every resource person. May this platform foster knowledge, creativity, and meaningful discussions. We pray for the success of this series and that it might enrich each and every mind and strengthen the academic fellowship. May all that we do today be guided by your grace. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, ma'am, for the prayer. And now my duty is to welcome the speaker, our speakers, and then the audience. Thank you so much for joining us for this particular series. And it's an attempt that we have been contemplating for a long time, the digital humanities. And thankfully, Akuka sponsored the course, and Dr. Phoebe from Department of English has coordinated the entire course, where we have a lot of resource persons from different departments of our college and from the outside. As a result, we would like to have the series to enrich our faculty members and the students on this particular topic, digital humanities. It is an emerging topic and trend, and we would like to learn the basics of that. It's a very introductory course, and we will refine it further in the coming days as well. So, at this juncture, I welcome all the speakers and the head of the departments and the faculty members, research scholars, and students who have gathered here. And probably within 5 minutes, some more people would have will be joining. Then I must thank the Dean R&D, Associate Dean, for the support throughout the MCC Research Colloquium and in this particular special series on digital humanities as well. Just to have more thoughts on this, I would like to invite Dr. Tabitha Durai, the Dean R&D, for the inaugural address. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. And very warm welcome to all our friends from MCC. This time we have not thrown it open to others, but we have kept it within MCC as we feel that the content is precious and we would like our faculty members to get acquainted with this, be the first ones to get acquainted with this new topic. We're very happy to have different departments partnering with MCCRC in this series. We have the English department, history, philosophy, MCA, and computer science. We are very happy and thankful to the heads of the departments and the faculty members for coming together for this very unique course. We stand at the crossroads. At a time when there is so much of talk about AI and automation, digitalization, and now we are at AI. Humanities was considered to be the soul of literature, of telling us how to live or how to tell stories, how to bring about critical thinking and all of that. And there was the digital side of it where there were tools that came in that helped us build, calculate, verify, and things like that. And today, these two worlds are coming together in this concept called digital humanities. And so, therefore, digital is not just by itself a standalone concept, but we're bringing in the soul to it. We're bringing in humanities along with the digital part of the world. And what is ahead of us is truly exciting. If you see, maybe in literature, in just probably maybe in 15 minutes, you'd be able to uh, analyze text, poetry, see what they have written, and bring out learning so quickly. And like we heard in history, we could talk about migration patterns probably. And in today's session, we're going to talk about ethics. And so there's going to be not just an interdisciplinary, but a supra-disciplinary view and an approach to learning a new concept. And we're very happy and we're very excited to have Dr. Phoebe with us. She's been instrumental in introducing this concept of digital humanities. Earlier in the MCC RC sessions, we also had Dr. Kumari Sunita, who had spoken on this topic a couple of years ago. And I believe that we in the MCC RC, we are pioneers in setting a trend in arts and science colleges, be it innovation or research, and today it is digital humanities. So as we embark on on this series of lectures, I'd like to welcome you all to be a part, to support our faculty members who are going to serve as resource persons. I just found a quote by a historian and a digital pioneer, Edward Ayers. He says, digital humanities is not a replacement for traditional humanities. They are a way to fulfill the oldest promises of humanities, to reach more people, to ask deeper questions, and to find the connections that bind us all together. With this, I'd like to welcome you all, and I hope that this will be a wonderful learning journey for all of us together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And when it comes to the day one of this series, we have Dr. Phoebe Angus, who is a very good teacher with the experience of more than 15 years and 13 years in MCC. And she has a unique blend of cultures from WCC, Loyola, and Stella Maris and National College Trichy, because she has done her UG, PG, MPhil, and PhD in 4 different institutions. So that is a diversity that we can have in her. And her research topic is on a feminist reading of lesser known women in select narratives from the Bible. And she has also translated, and edited a book, My Golden Moon Glass, and that is another milestone in her credit. And I could see that the international exposure that he has got with the different countries, Hong Kong and Oxford, then University of Saints, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and so on. And she has completed 5 minor and major research projects from various funding agencies for her pioneering work in the literature. And she has also contributed to a lot of books and book chapters, presented many papers in the conferences, and so on. So she is a person who has got the digital humanities course from the ACUCA, and therefore she is spearheading the entire series, and she is coordinating the same. And today, in day one, she is going to talk about the ethical dimensions of AI in digital humanities. And we would love to hear it from you, ma'am. And just information for the participants, every day we will give the feedback link at the end of the session. And please do fill the feedback form, because that will be counted as attendance. And we would like to have you throughout the course 6 days, so that you'll get the certificate with a lot of takeaways and learnings. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to thank the organizing team, Vijay Solomon sir, Kalyani ma'am, Tabitha ma'am. Thank you for your invitation, and thank you, Vijay Solomon sir, for your kind words of introduction. So let me begin today's session, the first of a series on digital humanities, the title being Ethical Dimensions of AI in Digital Humanities, Responsible Literary and Cultural Research. And this is the outline of my presentation. There are 4 sections. The first section, I would give a very general introduction about digital humanities and AI. It will be like an overview. The second section about data and interpretation. The third section will be on bias in AI. And finally, I would conclude my presentation with ethics, responsibility, and frameworks in digital humanities. So to begin with, the first session, Foundations of Digital Humanities, we all would have heard of this Tamil phrase, Katrathu Kaiman Alavu, Kalladadu Ulagalavu. Okay, I found this very apt to understand digital humanities and how we are connected with it to literature. It simply means that human knowledge is vast, but the time we take to understand the knowledge is very limited. For example, let's take all the plays of Shakespeare and assume around 30, approximately 38 plays. It would take approximately 45 to 55 hours, depending on the speed of reading, to understand these plays. But if we use digital humanities tools, we'll be able to compare the themes across all of these plays, or map the character networks, or understand the language patterns. And another example is, if you look at Tamil literature and translation, or do a comparative study of the Sangam literature and all the epics, which may be around more than 200 texts or so, it would take 1,000 hours for us to read and understand it. Whereas if we use digital humanities tools, we'll be able to attempt a cross-cultural thematic mapping, or ethical and philosophical pattern analysis in the matter of few minutes. And another example would be a corpus of novel. Let's take 5,000 novels together. Would take around 60,000 hours to read. But using digital humanities tools, you'll be able to study the various genres of the novel, how they have evolved over the years, and also probably analyze the stylistic shifts across all the 5,000 novels. So these are some of the possibilities of digital humanities. And so what we are actually trying to do, or the problem that digital humanities is trying to solve, is that millions of texts are impossible to read. as you know. So digital humanities helps us in seeing the patterns across these millions of texts, which is beyond human capacity to read one by one, to go over through each text. For example, if you look at high frequency words, they help us in identifying the themes. Now, we can't sit and read the text and try to identify the high frequency words. I'll give you a small example here. Let's take these high frequency words and let's say it appears across in Emily Dickinson's poem or any other poetry: love, marriage, music, joy, sweet, and play. So when we use a digital humanities tool, it would help us to analyze a theme not only in that particular text, but over across many texts. So it will club them under romance or celebration or harmony. So these are some of the possibilities of digital humanities. And when we look at a comparison between traditional and digital humanities, here is an example from the play Hamlet. Hamlet, as we all know, we're familiar with, it's one of the greatest tragedies of Shakespeare. So if we look at Hamlet from a traditional humanities perspective, we would probably say Hamlet feels conflicted and tragic. Whereas if we look at it from the digital humanities perspective, this is what we would attempt to say. Sentiment scores show increasingly negative towards the end. So this is by using a particular tool called sentiment analysis. And the second one is based on interpretation. Whatever we understand about Hamlet is based on interpretation, whereas when we use digital humanities tools, it is supported by measurable data. And thirdly, we might focus only on one text or probably take a few more of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies. But if we look at digital humanities, now we can compare this with a whole lot of multiple plays, not only Shakespeare's plays, but others' plays as well. Do we already do this in literature? Yes, we do. And most of our PhD research is based on this kind of a comparison or an in-depth research on a text. But the difference is when we look at it from the traditional humanities perspective, there can be views, there can be ideas or insights or interpretations. But when it comes to digital humanities, we can substantiate all our ideas and our interpretations with measurable data. So that is where we find the difference between traditional humanities and digital humanities. So what is digital humanities then? It is literature plus data and tools. So in the place of literature, we can substitute it with any of our humanities. It can be philosophy, it can be history, it can be any arts. So what do we do in digital humanities? Now, the exciting thing about digital humanities is we ask new kinds of questions probably which without these tools or without knowing that these are available might not have occurred in our mind. It's not that we do not do a critical analysis. We have never done in-depth study on our literature text or on humanities, but the scope is wide when it comes to applying digital humanities tools. And therefore, we see a lot of new possibilities when we try to apply DH tools to study our texts. For example, a simple question like this: is Dickinson more concerned with death than love across her entire corpus? So for doing a research on, let's say, a question like this, we would now consider all of Dickinson's poems, and we would use several digital humanities tools in order to do a research or write a research paper on this. So that is what makes this venture very exciting. Now, coming to another concept in digital humanities, now I would request any one of you to unmute and read this verse, Matthew 16, 2-3. Anybody? Can anyone unmute and read this verse, please? Yes? Anyone? Matthew 16, 2-3. Would anyone like to read it? Okay. Let me read it for you there. He replied, when evening comes, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. So here, Christ is talking about a pattern. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. So what is Christ talking about here? He's talking about the patterns that person can see. So these various patterns are what the machine is detecting. So in pattern recognition, what is happening is recurring patterns are detected, and based on these recurring patterns, predictions are made, and these predictions will lead to interpretation of meaning. So AI also does the same, but at a larger scale and speed. So where do we feature then? We come at that stage of interpretation, which is very important. So that's what Christ says here. The patterns are there, the patterns are repeated, but how are you interpreting the patterns? So the tools can bring visuals for you, the tools can analyze the text for you and present it in the form of charts or graphs and so on. But ultimately, the interpretation lies with the researcher, with the human person. Okay, let me move on. Now, a little bit of introduction about digital humanities. Uh, Roberto Buzza, he's supposed to be the founder, he's said to be the founder of humanities computing. He, along with Thomas Watson was a founder of IBM. He requested him to sponsor this project, and he compiled the text, Thomas Aquinas' text, Summa Theologica, which is a really huge text. He compiles all of that and creates an index, a concordance. And this particular project took almost 30 years. As you can see, almost 10 million words are in this volume. It is across 56 volumes and contains 70,000 pages. So he's the first person who has done a kind of humanities computing. So what was his interest? His interest were these terms: essay, that is to be, ens meaning being, actus meaning to act, and potentia meaning potential. So what is our inference from this? The inference is that before the index Thomisticus, scholars relied mainly on memory. Imagine reading so many 40 or more texts and then trying to recollect from memory in order to understand or get critical insights. So they used to make claims like this. Aquinas usually means this by the term. And so their interpretations were mostly intuitive. But after this index was created, these claims could be verified. You can't just make a claim. Now, for every claim that you make, you have the digitized version of the entire corpus of texts. So interpretation could be tested against the full corpus, and interpretation became evidence supported, not just authoritative. So this is the beginning of digital humanities, as you can see here. Before digital humanities, interpretations were subjective and more intuitive. But after this, we had solid evidence that will support the claims that the scholars made. For example, a claim that Aquinas made. For Aquinas, being essay is central to everything. All created things participate in being, but God is being itself. This particular claim, now with the use of this digital humanities tool or this concordance that they've created, they were able to understand this claim, or they were able to prove this claim across these concordances. So to give you a brief summary of the section 1, what we have seen so far is the problem that digital humanities solves. It expands the reading across a huge corpus of text, and AI will help us in detecting patterns. At the end of it, the human interpretation remains very central. Let me move on to the section 2. Now, section 2, we are going to look at data and interpretation. From data, we are going to move on to interpretation. So what is data then? Data is unprocessed and unorganized information. If you can look at the examples here, a list of words from Hamlet like death, king, ghost, revenge, night, and blood. They are just words. So data can be just words, and for a machine, a machine will understand data in terms of zeros and ones. Now, what we enter or the data that we compile or collect may be just a list of words. It means nothing. Student scores, for example, 45, 46, or 89. Look at these numbers here. They just mean number. They don't mean anything until they go through a processing or through some kind of an interpretation. Instagram likes, for example. So all these are mere numbers. So what should happen to data? The data must be transformed into useful information, applicable information. Then we get an insight about that data, something interesting. I can see some improvement in this, or something is missing in this. I can see some gap. That is the insight. And based on this insight, we finally make a decision. So that will be the research process when it comes to applying digital humanities to understand literature or any of the other humanities. For example, let's take the data. In the play Hamlet, the word death appears around 120 times. So this is mere data, number. So what is the information? The information that we gather from this that the word death is the most frequent word that appears. So what would be the insight? The insight would be the theme of death. It dominates the play. And final decision, we can classify Hamlet as a tragedy. Now, this is a very simple example that I'm giving, but when you try to understand big data and apply the same process, we will get further insights into this. Okay, so this is how data can be interpreted and understood. So digital humanities can also track emotional trajectory. Now, there is a concept called sentiment analysis. So what are the tools for sentiment analysis? In the forthcoming sessions, you'll be learning about this. So let me just introduce to you what this concept means. So sentiment analysis is the tool that will help you to classify certain works as a tragedy or a comedy or any other sentiments that you would decide it to be. For example, let's take these two sentences. The first sentence, I received the best gift ever. And another sentence, I am quite annoyed. I'm quite annoyed. So these two sentences, they are mere data. They are fed into this sentiment analysis model. What that is, in the upcoming sessions, you will learn about it. It's simply a tool which will analyze these two sentences. All right. So it gives a positive score to the first sentence, I received the best gift ever. And the score is 0.97. Now, don't worry about those numbers. Let's just understand it's a positive score. For the next sentence, I'm quite annoyed. The score that the model will give will be a negative score, right? So what we already know, even without having these tools or this model, when we read a sentence, we know that this is a sentiment score or this is a positive sentence, this is a negative sentiment. What DH does is, digital humanities does, it makes visible what we already intuitively know. Now, these are just two sentences, so that is why it is easy for us to analyze. Now, imagine there are 100 plays that are fed through the sentiment model, and then you're going to analyze all of these, 10,000s of words and so on. So that will help us to go through a lot of text, which we can't do in a few hours, few minutes. So the bottom line is that digital humanities does not replace human feeling. It just visualizes it and measures it. So like I said, the ultimate inference comes from the human being. So here is an example of the sentiment arc. So DH can track emotional trajectory as well. For example, if we take a simple poem of Emily Dickinson, I'm nobody, who are you? This is a poem. For want of time, we're not going into the poem, but if we try to represent this poem in the form of a narrative arc, there are three moments in this poem. The first moment, it starts with isolation, and then it leads to joy, and finally, it ends in a reflective state. So joy is a moment when the poem peaks. And reflection is when it comes to a very calm and composed moment when you accept who you are and accept the realities around you. So this interpretation intuitively, when we read one poem, we already know that. But if you want to compare this emotional arc of Emily Dickinson's one poem, I'm Nobody, Who Are You, with a whole lot of other poems, we probably would get different varieties of emotional arcs where visually we can compare or club some of these poems together and say, all these 10 poems or 20 poems have this similar emotional arc. And then we do a lot of other analysis using other DH tools, and we get a lot of insights, beautiful insights into this. All right, so that is about emotional trajectory. Now moving on to the DH life cycle. So this is a DH life cycle, and I'm using cooking in order to make us understand how this works. So to cook food, we collect the ingredients in the same manner. Downloading the text is the first step. That is collecting the raw materials, and then you clean the food. So also the data that we collected should be clean. So what is text cleaning? Again, it's one of the tools that you will, DH tools that you will use to clean the text. What it is, how it is done, in the forthcoming sessions, we will come to know about it. Okay. So washing, then cleaning, and what is the next step? Starting to cook. So we cook the food, and there are again lot of DH tools that you use in order to cook the text. And what is the next step? It is to visualize the text. Just like how we plate the dish, we place the dish in a proper way, and then we present it. Finally comes the tasting and the evaluation. That is a step where we interpret the data. So collecting the data, cleaning the data, analyzing it, visualizing it, and finally interpreting it. A very typical research process is what we are using digital humanities tools. We are doing that to our humanities text. So from this, we come to asking the right question, right? So if we want to do an analysis, we need to ask the right question. So there are 4 questions here. What words are in the play? The second question, how does Dickinson use nature imagery to explore death and immortality? The third question, how does the frequency of death-related words shape the theme of tragedy? And finally, how many poems did she write? So the question that I'm going to ask you is a weak question or a strong question. Which do you think intuitively, which do you think is a weak question? So let me first ask, what are the question numbers? You can simply type the numbers on the chat box. What are the questions that you think are weak question? So what is a weak question? A weak question that can give you random results, and a strong question will give you very meaningful interpretation. So if you can, okay.
They can use the chat box because the live
Yes.
streaming is going on. Yeah.
Okay. So I kindly request you to type your answers in the chat box. The question is, what among these questions, 1, 2, 3, or 4, what are the question numbers you think are weak questions? Only the weak questions. Can a few of you kindly type in the chat? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? So what would be a weak question? Something that will have random results. 1 and 4. Very good. Okay. 2. Some of you are saying 2. 1. Okay, so from this we see how intuitively we can see what is a weak question and what is a strong question. Thank you for the participants who have shared the response. So question number 1 and 4 would be a weak question, and 2 and 3 would be a strong question. Like I said, it would have a meaningful interpretation. So the tools don't create the meaning. It's a question that will give you the direction. Therefore, it is very important, more than knowing the digital humanities tools, just like how we need to frame a proper research question. So also, before using digital humanities tools, we need to frame the right question. This is applicable in any kind of research. So the quality of research will then depend on the quality of questions. So what we're going to see in the next few slides are the type of DH questions that we can ask, because for using digital humanities tools, we should be very careful about the type of how we word the question for the particular tool that we are using. So the first is, let's say, the what questions. What questions would identify patterns, and it's used for word frequency and topic modeling. So what is topic modeling? What is word frequency? We'll come to know in the upcoming sessions. There are digital humanities tools which will help you to identify the word frequency and topic modeling. So what would be the focus? So the focus would be on the content or themes of frequencies. So if your research is on content analysis or thematic analysis or on frequency, then we use the what kind of questions. Okay. Let me give you the example here. What are the most frequent words in Hamlet, or what themes appear in Dickinson's poetry? So the next one would be the who type of question. If our research is on people or relationships, and this is used for character network analysis, and the common questions would be, who are the most central characters in Hamlet? By reading the play, we would know. But across the plays of Shakespeare or across a corpus of text, this is what we have to envision. Now, the examples that I'm giving you are for 1 or 2 texts, right? So who interacts most with the protagonist would be another type of a who question. And moving on, the when question, time-based analysis. For this, we can use sentiment timeline graphs in order to understand. So what would we try to understand? The changes over time, across a play, over the narrative arc, and so on. So when do emotional peaks occur in a novel, for example? When does the tone shift from positive to negative? So these are when-based questions. Then there are where-based questions, which will analyze the space and the setting. This is used for mapping and spatial analysis, where we have locations or geography of that particular play or novel involved in this. For example, where do most events take place in a narrative? Or where are cultural references concentrated in the novel or in most of these novels written by an author, and so on. The next would be the why question. This is for interpretation and meaning, and mainly for critical interpretation. This gives a deeper literary understanding of reasoning. For example, Why does Shakespeare emphasize death in Hamlet? Or why does Dickinson repeatedly use nature imagery? So these are why type of questions. So the next is how, process, and technique. If we need to understand that, we use a how type of questions. For example, how does Shakespeare construct tragedy through language? Or how does Dickinson use punctuation and form to create meaning? So this is used for stylistic and linguistic analysis. And now let me compile all of these DH questions using the play Hamlet. So I'm using the play Hamlet to frame the right questions, the DH questions. So what would be frequent words? Death and revenge would be the output. Who Hamlet interacts mostly with Horatio? And when emotional intensity peaks in Act 3? And where key scenes take place in the castle? And why it explores existential crisis and how Shakespeare uses soliloquies to reveal inner conflict. So when we do analysis using DH tools, this will be the probable outcome. Okay, so I've given you a list of these questions and the probable outcome. So summary of this section 2, what we're seeing here is digital humanities tools, they make visible what we already feel intuitively. What we feel intuitively would be about a few number of texts that we have read, but not over an entire corpus of text. And it's not just about data. It's about asking powerful questions that will lead to meaningful interpretation, because data cannot interpret itself. Data is just 0 and 1. Ultimately, it's a teacher, it's a researcher, it's a scholar, it's a human person that gives meaning to the result. So AI can analyze data, but the meaning will still require human judgment. Now, moving on to section 3, where we're looking at bias in AI and digital humanities. Now, this is a very important aspect that we have to understand about humanities and about AI in general. So the important questions we are asking here is whose voice is heard, who is excluded? And if training data is biased, the output will also be biased. So the question may be, if we already know that we have a lot of bias in interpretation and so on, then why are we still using this? Why are we being acquainted with this? It is all the more important for us to know about these bias so that we will, especially the humanities, all of us who are in the field of humanities will play a major role in that first point, training data. So that if the training data is biased, then the output will also be biased. So we're going to look at a few types of bias here. Let me just introduce these in general. Now, there are a lot of bias. Among them, I have just compiled a very few bias which are important. The first is literary canon bias in text corpora. Let's say, for example, the texts which are selected as training material will be it is 70% British and American novels, 20% European text, 10% global South text. So what happens? What will the model see? What will the machine understand? It will read a huge volume from British and American literary language. And then there is moderate input from European languages or literatures. So there's very limited global South representation. So what will happen? The dominant cultural imagination, it will become the statistical norm, because what we are feeding inside, 70% of it is British and American culture. So what happens is there is lack of representation from world literatures. So the bottom line is what matters the most may not be present. And what matters the most, as we know, it is a 10% and 20%, which is not represented, is what is important, but that is not what the model would see. So the model listens most closely to the loudest voice in the archive. For example, if we look at African oral traditions, Dalit autobiographies, these are just examples that I'm giving you, indigenous cosmologies or post-colonial resistance narratives. If they are not represented, what would be the outcome? Collective identity is not heard, spiritual ecology or caste oppression, communal survival, so all these things are not heard. All right. So if we create a corpus of texts which do not have the representation of these texts of African oral traditions, etc., then their voices will not be heard, and therefore this would create a text-based bias. The second bias is optical character recognition bias, or OCR bias. So what is this bias? Now, this bias is created on non-Western scripts or handwritten texts, old print texts, or colonized or marginalized texts, which do not have a very clean or neat text. So some texts which are read accurately, but some are misread. For example, let me give you these two inputs. Okay, well, input A will have clean English text. It's a very clean PDF file, a modern font, a very clear print. So how will the OCR read it? How is it read? It will read it with 98 to 99% of accuracy. So by reading, you can imagine using your Google Lens. I think most of us are familiar with using Google Lens, right? So when we use Google Lens and read a clean text English font, the output or the result will be a clean text. It is very reliable. We can find a strong presence of it in topic modeling and so on. In other words, the analysis of such a text will be more accurate. Whereas, let's take input B, where it is a palm leaf manuscript or Tamil scripts or any of these old scripts, handwritten letters or mixed scripts and so on, the output will be inaccurate. The names will be distorted. So let me show you an example. This is a handwritten Tamil text. And when I use the Google Lens and try to take a picture of it or try to select it, as you can see, there are so many lines which are not selected. Okay, so we need to do some more research on this and develop these machines so that they will be able to read handwritten text also with accuracy. Otherwise, the output will be skewed. So the second bias that we saw was OCR bias, bias in reading. The third one is the algorithmic bias. Now, this again is a very important idea to learn. This is how AI learns prejudices. If the society is prejudiced and if the information that is given into the system is also biased or prejudiced, then the output will also be prejudiced. Let me give you 3 examples of this which happen in real time. The first example is, see, AI was trained for 10 years. How many years? For 10 years, it was trained with resumes of mostly men. So what happened to that, the AI that was trained for 10 years with only resumes of men, this AI tool, it started rejecting female applicants. See, for the 10 years, probably the number of female applicants was very less. But there came a time when there were many women who had started applying for this job. So when they started applying, most of their applications were rejected because AI did not recognize it. So the training model had only male resumes. First example. The next one is an example that you find in this particular text, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill, and a very interesting book I would recommend you to go through. So there's this example given there. Poor students who applied for loan, they were not able to get a loan because the model rejected them. Why? Because when they entered that zip code, in the training model, it was given that anyone from this zip code, they will not be able to pay back the loans. Can you understand? So that bias is created in the training model itself on this zip code. So any student who came from that zip code, they were not able to progress in their education. And this concept about data mining and policy algorithms and predictive risk models, this you will find in Automating Inequality, a book called Automating Inequality, where she talks about how data mining and these policy algorithms, these are all tried out on working class people. So they become almost like testing grounds for AI prediction and so on. So when we look at the positive side of how it would predict and analyze and automate processes, the negative side is how AI does not discover meaning. It will only repeat the patterns. So if our pattern is prejudiced, if our patterns is biased, then the output will also be biased. And this is what we find in this particular book, Algorithms of Oppression. Again, a very important text of how search engines also reinforce racism. That is, what are the words that we enter into the Google search and how do we search for it? That also promotes racism. Another interesting book is Race After Technology, where Rua Benjamin talks about how technology, while we might think it's not prejudice, it is not neutral. And here an interesting concept is introduced of a new Jim code where it reinforces white supremacy and inequality, and how these automated systems, they only aggravate the already existing prejudices. So these are some of the issues as humanities we need to deal with. Then another bias I would introduce to you is a platform bias. In that, there is this concept called collaborative filtering. And let me not go through all of this. Let me give you just one example of, let's say, theater and performance. When we browse through some of the details on social media, reels or posts, the algorithm would push in the platform, or it would select most of the viral stand-up comedy than street theaters or something of good quality. So what you see in the second column here, experimental poetry, street theater, classical works in music, art films, feminist historiography, subaltern studies, all these are quality works. But posts or reels or information about this is not promoted in the platforms. Okay, so collaborative filtering is no one is interested in this. Because people are not interested in this, what surfaces more would be motivational quotes, viral stand-up comedy, or 30-second. Nobody listens to entire music now. They only listen to the 30-second part of it, which becomes a very viral video. Or when a movie is made into a meme, they would rather see that, or flashy AI and so on. So this is collaborative filtering, and because of this, what happens is engagement prediction would select high retention posts. What are the posts which are seen by most people? What are most popular? What becomes popular immediately? What are the posts which aggravates people? Even negative engagement is still engagement. The machine does not feel your emotions, whether you're happy about the post or sad about the post or angry about the post. It simply knows that you're watching it for some time and knows that there is engagement, and for how long is this post fresh. So all these are what the machine knows. These are patterns that the machine will read and accordingly promote posts which are of not good quality. So platform bias, it amplifies what's already popular. It shapes visibility, knowledge, and culture, and therefore, what is popular becomes authority, like how we see happening in the world today. And another bias is sentiment bias. So the texts that I've taken are a few lines from, again, Emily Dickinson's poem. Because I could not stop for that, he kindly stopped for me. And another line, the carriage held but ourselves and immortality. As you can see, the words which are, when the machine reads it, death, kindly, or carriage, it would uh, assume that it is negative or weak, positive, and neutral. Whereas a human would understand the word death as a gentle companion, or the word kindly as a central tonal shift, or carriage as symbolic journey to eternity. So as you can see, sentiment analysis can misread poems. So that is called sentiment bias. When the author had meant one thing, but then the nuances of it is not understood by the machine. Why? Because a machine sees only words, whereas a human would see the meaning. So the sentiment analysis can simplify emotion, but we know that literature is definitely more complex. So to sum up section 3, say, absence of data is not absence in reality, and a machine would see words, whereas a human would see more meaning. And bias, when we look at these bias, they accumulate. It is not accidental. Sometimes bias is created intentionally, and the problem with bias is that through every click, the bias keeps accumulating. So it does not appear once, it keeps accumulating across the system. So let me conclude with this last session in a few minutes. This is about ethics and responsibility and a framework that we have to understand or implement digital humanities. So I begin with Foucault's idea of knowledge and power. Foucault says that knowledge is shaped and controlled by institutions, and archives, books, and discourses, they shape the truth or the reality around us. So we simply do not access knowledge, but we are shaped by the systems that produce it. So this is Foucault's understanding of truth and knowledge and systems. Now, the digital equivalent of that is algorithms will shape the visibility. And these platforms, they control content, as we saw, algorithmic bias and platform bias. So AI bias is hidden, but hidden and it is not visible, like how power is also subtle. And it is because of this that a person like Lawrence Lessig, he's a legal scholar and professor at the Harvard University and a founder of Creative Commons. So he came up with this NGO called Creative Commons, and it is through this that we have the different ways of sharing text. See, when knowledge is power, then this knowledge has to be accessible to everyone. That is his idea. And even when it is accessible, it has to be used judiciously. So for this, we have 4 different ways of getting data and sharing data. Now, I'll just quickly brief you about these 4 ways. The first one is when you are looking at an image or a video or any content in the web, you're browsing through it. If it has these 2 words, CC BY, it means that you can reuse the content the image or whatever content, some information from the website, you can reuse it, but you need to give credit to the author. The next is CC by SA 4.0. 4.0 is a version, is an advanced version of this copyright. So here you give credit to the original person who has created this, original creator, but share it under the same license. Okay, and the next one is CC by NC, where you're permitted to modify or adapt it, but it is for non-commercial use only. And yeah, this is where you find this. Can you see in this image, CC by NC? It is 2.0 version. And then finally, there is another copyright, CC by ND, where no modifications are allowed, but the content can be used commercially as well. So why is this important? Commercial or copyrighted content, as you can find in news articles, books, films, and so on, the reuse will require permission or sometimes payment, and redistribution can violate it, and quoting extensively from these materials can also be very illegal. So there are some materials which belong to the public domain, like very old texts or works with expired copyright or government documents. In some countries, they are free to use, free to modify, distribute for teaching, AI training, and remix, and so on. So when we look at digital humanities and we want to collect some materials or the original or convert text to the digital form, we need to keep these in mind. So the quick check, I told you, I give you a framework, right? So this is a quick check you can do on whatever material that you are finding. Is there a license clearly stated? Ask that first question. If it is yes, proceed. If it is no, if there's no license stated, assume that it is copyrighted. So what does a license allow now? Is it commercial, modification, redistribution? That is the second. The third question, have I credited the creator properly? The source, the license type, and so on. If the answer to any of this is no, do not reuse the material. Okay, and when there is no license that's stated in any material in the digital form, it automatically means that all rights are reserved. So you can read it, get a link to it, but not reuse, modify, or redistribute it. So free access does not mean you're free to use the material. So if you don't have the license, you don't have the permission. So what are the legal implications? So unknowingly, we might violate copyright or repost some illegal content or use the content incorrectly in our research. And ethical considerations would be the creators would lose control over their original work. If they're not credited or if they're not compensated, it will negatively impact the creators. And in this, it is a marginalized creators who are affected because their work, which they would have put a lot of hard work, right? It circulates, but they don't have a recognition for their work. And academic implication, there's a lot of plagiarism risk and research integrity will be compromised, as well as the institution's credibility will also be affected. And in this, if we connect usage with algorithmic bias, we find that commercial content with the big budget, they mostly dominate the website. So what happens, that's the reason why it is difficult for us to identify open access or CC scholarship. They get buried in this big data, which is commercially used. So visibility favors only those who can pay. So the content for which people can pay is boosted more by algorithm and so on. So the system, it amplifies power and not openness. That is the algorithm bias in this. Coming to some of the key principles that we can keep in mind. Always reveal where your data is retrieved from. Cite data set digital editions and archives, and declare digitalization decisions. Now, this is very important. We have to describe what is left and why some of these things were left out while the digitalization was going on. And consider the community consultation. When we are getting some information from marginalized groups or indigenous groups, we need to get their consent. Acknowledge translators and editors and those who are digitalizing it. And the ethical checklist that I will leave you with is I will check my data set. So I will cite my sources, I will question all the patterns which are there and interpret responsibly. So these are the ethical checklists. And to finally conclude this presentation on digital humanities, so what is digital humanities not? It is not reducing literature to numbers. It is supporting or deepening human interpretation through patterns. Digital humanities does not replace traditional humanities method. It is to build on the tradition. What we are giving in digital humanities is more evidence-based interpretation. And it is not a passing academic trend. It is a method which adds scale and comparison and verification. It does not oversimplify literature, although it appears to be. It uses data, it's a starting point. You get deeper interpretation from the visuals that are generated. And it's not an AI understanding of literature. AI can only detect patterns, but it is humans who interpret meaning. And finally, it does not weaken the research quality just because the text can, the tools can read all the text. Does it mean the students will not read anything because everything is given to them? But the point here is that it gives digital humanities tools will help you to get better questions and more transparency in terms of the research. And it is not neutral or unbiased. Therefore, it has to be critically examined for bias. So that is our human responsibility by using the DH tools. It is not an equal representation of all cultures. As we saw, there are a lot of gaps in digital humanities. There are inequalities, and this is where, as a researcher, as a teacher, as facilitators, we need to work on these gaps. Does it replace teachers? No, not at all. It only enhances the role of the teachers as interpreters, and it definitely helps in the pedagogy. We are going to get a new way of looking at novels or looking at literature, or looking at humanities itself. And then it is, does it end traditional humanities? No, it only expands humanities with more depth and scale. And finally, does it force change in teaching practices? So long, for years, for decades, I've been teaching in this way. I've been analyzing texts in this way. Does it end here? All the traditional methods? No, it only offers way to enrich our teaching, to extend our teaching, our insights into the text. So with this, thank you so much for your patient listening. And I would like to welcome a few questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity again. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the impactful presentation. So audience can now unmute and ask your question to the speaker directly.
Phoebe, this is Ashik here. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So you were talking about the bias, right? Bias, even the search engine is more biased, is what you're telling us. Do you think it is perhaps because of the way the Western scholars have designed the system, or is it something that to do with the entire structure itself? Because say if we are searching, if Asians are searching, obviously if machine is going to learn from our search, it may not have similar bias like the way the Western scholars have designed it. So do you think this bias has this kind of a different approach when it comes to who uses it, what the machine learns? Because machine is learning from everybody, not only from the Europeans and the Americans and the white community, but also from the brown community like us. So my thing is, do you think that bias can be addressed because there are more non-whites who are using it?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It's a very interesting and very challenging question as well. So, I'll give you an example. If we browse for a doctor, if we browse for a teacher in the search engine and we look for images, mostly for a doctor, it will be male. And for a nurse, it will be female. For a teacher, it will be female. We may find a lot of differences in that, but like you said, it keeps accumulating, right? We have started, or where technology has reached places in a much later stage of its development, those people have only just started using AI or just started using generative AI and so on. Whereas where it originated, people have already started using it. So there are two factors in this: how it is being used and who designed it. So if it is designed by people with bias or with prejudice, so that bias is already embedded in the system. The next step is people starting to use it. So when users keep feeding information into that, like I mentioned in the presentation, this bias will only start to accumulate. So as teachers and researchers, we need to be aware of this bias, and we can design our own engine. So that is what the alternative that I would find. Why can't we design our own methods, our own digital tools, compile our own technology in order to address these bias? So I mentioned earlier that this there is 30% and 10% which a gap that we find in digital humanities tools, a gap in terms of representation. So how do we bring them, or how do we have their voices being heard? It will be only if we take all these texts and start digitizing them and make them available. Make them available in the digital space. So that is the first step that we can take in response, and then to create our own digital tools through which we can address these bias.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, ma'am. This is Sample. Can I?
Yes, Sample. Yes.
Isn't digital humanities taking us back to the close verbal analysis, which was prevalent in the 1930s, and it was labeled as very extreme, analyzing poetry as serious as mathematics? That was one of the remarks that F.R. Lewis had to make. And T.S. Eliot felt that it was a lemon squeezer school of criticism. When we explore on analyzing, especially closely analyzing text, poetry, fiction, prose, or plays, do you think it will take us back to the concerns that were felt almost 100 years back? Will this be labeled as extreme or preferring intelligence over emotion? So I would like to know what you think on those areas.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sample. Very interesting question. So what you are explaining is kind of like a close reading, but what the examples that I gave were applicable to smaller text. So when we apply DH tools to just one text, obviously it would look like a mathematical model. The outcome would be only maths and so on. But we are trying to move away from the text and attempt a distant reading. Like Franco Moretti said in when he describes about world literature, is that we need to have a distant reading. So when we do a distant reading of text, we're not looking only at one particular text, but the entire corpus. That is the first step. Then we take that entire corpus, compare it with the text from some other culture. For example, it can be all the Sangam poetry, with probably the Song of Solomon, because both are love poetry in theme. Okay, so we compare both of these poems. That is where distant reading comes in. And when we use DH tools to analyze it, the interpretation part lies with us. Okay, the tools are there. They use mathematical models in order to analyze it, because they are digital processing. They are digital processes. So the process might be like that, but finally, when we get the output will lend itself to a lot of interpretations. There, it is not 0 and 1. So when it visualizes it, when we carry forward some of these DH tools, I've given just one example of the sentiment analysis and so on, but there are a lot of other ways to analyze. So when we get the result, the interpretation can be varied. For instance, I can look at the same graph and I can interpret it in a different way. You can have your own interpretation, so long as you're able to prove it along with this visual. So in this way, we're not going back 100 years. We are in being more inclusive, in that we are not just looking at one text. We are looking at the beauty and richness across cultures. So that, I think, will bring a kind of unity, in the kind of diversity that we have in literature, and give a beautiful identity to the various world literatures that we have, in terms of hearing all of their voices.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is one question in the chat box.
Okay. As a follow-up to Ashik sir's question and your response to it, what sort of theoretical, practical knowledge would we need to acquaint ourselves to develop our own indigenous DH tools? Okay, that's a question for which we need to be interdisciplinary in order to create a theoretical and practical framework in response to your question. So, yes, I said we need to develop our own tools. The tools are already available, but we can create our own search engine, our own prototype, which will help us to analyze these texts. And another thing we can do is to digitize what are the texts which have not been digitized, what are the indigenous texts or the folk related texts which have not yet been digitized. First step is to digitize them, then we use our own tools to analyze it. And when it comes to search engine analysis, then we need to optimize the search. Whatever content we are creating for the digital space, we need to use the appropriate keywords so that no, just like how we have keywords for the abstracts. Why do we have these keywords? So that when it comes to a researcher from some part of the world searching under this particular topic, our abstract or our paper will surface. So we need to use these strategies in order to make our knowledge or our culture more visible. So that I think would be the practical approach. And I mentioned we have to go interdisciplinary because for humanities to develop these tools, we definitely need the expertise from the data science departments, computer departments, and so on. In fact, we are in the process of developing a digital humanities tool. So once it is finalized, we'll probably introduce it to our MCC community first, and then we will take it forward to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Any questions?
வணக்கம்மா. வணக்கம்மா. நான் கருணாகரன்
Yes.
தமிழ்துறையில இருந்து
Yes, sir. Yes.
பேசுறேங்கம்மா. ரொம்ப சிறப்பா
Yes, sir.
இருந்ததுங்கம்மா. இன்னைக்கு ஒரே ரொம்ப நல்லா இருந்தது. இது நம்ம முன்னாடியே கூட நீங்க இத பத்தி என்கிட்ட நம்ம பேசியிருக்கோம் இது. இந்த டேட்டா சயின்ஸ் டூல்ஸ் வந்து தமிழுக்கு வந்து எந்த அளவுக்கு சப்போர்ட் பண்ணுது அப்படின்னு தெரியலைங்கம்மா. எங்களுக்கு வந்து பழைய சங்கம் லிட்டரேச்சர்ல இருந்து ஓரளவு நாட்டுடைமையாக்கப்பட்ட நூல்கள் வரைக்கும் எல்லாமே டிஜிட்டலா பண்ணியிருக்காங்க. இதுல வந்து அதுக்கு
Yes, sir.
உரைகள் எல்லாம் டிஜிட்டலா இல்ல. எல்லாமே ஸ்கேன் பண்ணி புக்காவே அப்படியே ஒரு பிடிஎஃபாவே தான் வச்சிருக்காங்க. அதனுமே ஸ்கேன் பண்ணவும் இல்ல. இன்னொரு உரைகள ஒப்பிட்டு பார்க்குற அளவுக்கு கூட எங்கள்ட்ட பெருசா தரவுகள், டேட்டாஸ் இல்ல. இப்ப இதெல்லாம் இதுல வந்து சேர்ந்து பண்றதுக்கான வாய்ப்புகள் எப்படி இருக்குங்கிறத கொஞ்சம் சொல்லுங்க.
Yes, sir. Like I said, this reading, we are still not advanced in reading the PDF text. Typed and scanned PDF வந்து ரொம்ப clear-ஆ we'll be able to read. The OCR will read it. Whereas scanned text English-லயே it will not read it properly. அதனால this is a gap. This is an area where we need to work and develop tools. அப்படி if we are able to get some project, அது ஒரு project-ஆ எடுத்தே we can do it, sir. Where we can create a data set of handwritten Tamil scripts or PDF Tamil scripts. அதுலேருந்து if you are able to create a huge data set which will be able to read through that tool, and then we can convert all of these texts. நீங்க சொன்ன அந்த text எல்லாம் we can digitize it. Sorry.
இப்ப
So
அந்த
that
மாதிரி
is
இருக்கிற
that is the
டெக்ஸ்ட
first
வந்து
step.
ஓகே சார் சொல்லுங்க.
Sorry, sir. சொல்லுங்க சார்.
இல்ல நாங்க அந்த மாதிரி இருக்கிற ஒரு பக்கத்தை மட்டும் அப்படியே எடுத்துக்கிட்டு நம்ம டெக்ஸ்டா மாத்தும்போது, இல்ல அத வந்து வாய்ஸுக்கு கொண்டு வரும்போது, அத வாசிக்க சொல்லும்போது, இப்போ ஒரு பக்கத்துல வந்து 2 பகுதிகளா டெக்ஸ்ட் இருக்கும். 2 காலமா. அது என்ன செய்யுது? நேராவே வாசிச்சிருது. அது ஒரு தொடரா இந்த மாதிரி சிக்கல் எல்லாம் இருக்கு. இப்ப இத வச்சுக்கிட்டு இதுல வந்து மேற்கொண்டு ஒர்க் பண்றதெல்லாம் ரொம்ப சிரமமா இருக்கு.
Yes, sir. So in that case, in the first step, digitizing step, அதுலயே there is a lot of gap. அத first நம்ம work பண்ணணும். Then digitize பண்ணாதான் அதுக்கு further analysis tools வச்சு பண்ண முடியும், sir. ஸோ நாங்க டெவலப் பண்ற டூல் வந்து we will further it to தமிழ். இப்ப தமிழ் டெக்ஸ்ட்டை நீங்க இந்த கரெக்ட் ஃபார்மேட்ல கொடுத்தீங்கன்னா அதை எப்படி அனலைஸ் பண்ணணும்னு we will try to work in the prototype that we can do, sir. But at that first step we need to take it up as a project and work on it. If it is that technology is not yet available, technology is available, it's not incorporated in the apps that we have. Like Google Lens and the image I showed you. If we use Google Lens to read the handwritten Tamil text, it's not reading it completely. அதுலயே gaps இருக்கு. So அதுலயே if there is a fault, then we need to work on that first. Scan பண்ற அந்த method அதுலயே we need to develop. And so these are the possibilities. The first step, digitizing itself, Tamil and other texts, we have a gap, and analysis of this also we have a gap. So நாங்க develop பண்ற அந்த prototype-ல first we'll start to work on Tamil text இந்த மாதிரி analyze பண்ணலாம்னா we can start. So.
இல்ல இப்ப அத பண்றதுக்கு நம்ம ஏதாவது பண்ண முடியுங்களா?
பண்ணலாம், so we can collaborate and work on it, sir. இப்ப அந்த
நன்றிங்கம்மா, நன்றி.
prototype Englishல we are developing இல்லையா? So the next step வந்து we'll incorporate Tamil and slowly we will become multilingual.
நன்றிம்மா.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from the audience side? If there is no questions, I thank the speaker, Dr. Phoebe Angus, for such an engaging and enriching session. Your ability to connect complex ideas with the real-world elements made the session both insightful and inspiring. We are grateful for the knowledge and perspectives you have shared with us today. Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of MCCRC, I thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
So dear participants, the feedback form is already posted in the chat box. Kindly fill that and use your MCC ID to fill the feedback form. The link will be open for 2 more minutes. Kindly fill the feedback form. And tomorrow we have enriching session by Dr. Femina Shiba. The feedback link is in the chat box. Kindly fill it using your MCC ID. Vijay sir, can I end the meeting? Thank you all.